after Thanksgiving, you might find yourself with a lot of leftovers. So let's make sure none of those go to waste. Today I want to share some easy storage tips as well as some yummy recipes using up leftovers. And with that, let's get started. First up is herbs. I don't know about you guys, but I find myself always buying extra herbs during the holiday season, and they're usually the ones that I don't use that often. Things like rosemary, parsley, and sage, I don't really use on a daily basis or in my everyday cooking. Not to mention, when you buy them at the store, I feel like they give you such a large quantity. So it's good to know some ways to save or preserve them just in case you do end up having extra. First of all, you can actually freeze them whole. This is really good for heartier herbs such as rosemary, thyme, or sage. What you're going to want to do is spread them out in a single layer on a baking sheet or a plate and place that whole tray or plate in the freezer. Once they are frozen, you can go ahead and move them into another airtight container and they are ready to take out and use as needed. For softer herbs such as cilantro, mint, and parsley, they are best frozen by putting them into ice cubes. So simply remove the stems and then you can chop them or leave them whole, add them to an ice cube tray and fill with just a bit of water. And then once these are frozen, you can pop them out and add them either to a Ziploc bag or to a Tupperware. Another option is to even freeze them in soup broth instead of water. You can actually freeze herbs individually or in flavor combinations. So if you always use the same two herbs together in a soup or a stew, you can mix those right there in the little ice cube tray, add a little veggie broth on top, and then same as with the water ice cubes, just freeze until frozen, and then you can pop those out and add them into another Ziploc or a Tupperware. Just make sure you label them, especially if you do different flavor combinations. And these cubes are great for adding into soups or stews. You can even add them into your beans while you're cooking them, or really anywhere where you need a pop of herbs. Now, another option, of course, is to dry these. So for the sturdier herbs, such as rosemary, sage, and thyme, you can actually just tie them in a bundle and then hang them up to dry. And that will take just about a week or so. You'll know they're ready to use when they are dry to the touch, and you can easily crumble them with your fingers. Now, herbs that have more moisture, such as basil, chives, and mint, you'll probably want to dry in an oven or a dehydrator if you have one. So just remove the leaves from the stems and you're going to use a very low heat here, 180 degrees Fahrenheit or less. And just let those dry for about 2 to 4 hours. And same thing, you will know that they are ready to use once they are dry to the touch and you can easily crumble them with your fingers. Now, it is very tempting to want to crumble these all right away, but for the best flavor, you actually want to keep them as whole as possible and just crumble them right before you're about to use them. Let's talk the freezer. You guys probably know I love my freezer. I just think it is such a helpful tool for extending the life of your leftovers. But of course, not everything is gonna freeze well. So let's quickly go over what you should versus should not freeze. First up, bread. Now, this may seem like an obvious one, but of course, bread is perfect for the freezer. I actually freeze my bread on a regular basis, even not during the holidays. If I make a couple loaves at home, or even if I buy it at Costco, I always keep my bread in the freezer and it just helps it last longer. So now a couple tips before you freeze your bread. Make sure that everything is sliced all the way. Even my dinner rolls, I will just slice them down the middle so that you don't have to worry about slicing it while it's frozen. And then of course for a loaf, you will 100% need to slice it first because it is just impossible to slice a frozen loaf of bread. Now my next tip for freezing bread is optional, but I do like to do it especially for homemade loaves because I find that sometimes the slices can stick together. So this is just a really simple way to prevent that from happening. If you alter the slice direction by putting some of them face up and some of them face down, it will help the bread break apart more easily because sometimes bread does have the tendency to stick together, especially if you smush it down into your freezer, it will form one big clump again. Don't smush your bread into the freezer, okay? Just gently rest it in there until it is frozen solid, and then those pieces will be easier to break apart. Not to mention, if you stagger them and do some up, some down, that will also make it easier for you to break apart those slices as well. Lastly, if you do have different kinds of bread, just make sure you are writing what kind it is on the outside of the Ziploc bag to avoid confusion later. Mashed potatoes is a no. I was actually surprised by this one. I would have thought potatoes would be fine in the freezer, but apparently they will come out very mealy, so it is not recommended due to the altered texture that you will get when they come out of the freezer. Now, if any of you have specific experience with this, let us know in the comments because I've actually never tried freezing potatoes before. I definitely thought it would work, but from the research I have done online, it is not recommended to freeze potatoes, or mashed potatoes in our case. Gravy, on the other hand, is a yes. If you do end up having leftover gravy and you want to freeze it, it is totally fine in the freezer. Although I did see it recommended that you freeze it into smaller portions so that when you defrost it and reheat it, you're only reheating the amount that you actually need instead of the whole container. So you could do this by using those silicone soup cube containers or just a few smaller Tupperware. The green bean casserole with those crispy onions or any kind of crispy crunchy topping is not going to do well in the freezer, and that is also a texture thing. Once you defrost it, you will never get that crispy topping again. So it's best to just eat it as a leftover within the next few days after Thanksgiving. Cranberry sauce, on the other hand, is perfectly okay in the freezer. I actually like to use it in my morning oats. So if you wanted to, you could add your leftover cranberry sauce into an ice cube tray and just pop out a couple cubes into your morning oats. It makes a very nice holiday oatmeal. Salad, of course, is a no in the freezer. If you do have leftover salad after your Thanksgiving, I would recommend just eating it over the next few days. You, of course, can mix it up and have it in other ways. You can put it into a wrap or into a sandwich if you don't just want to have a plain salad. So I would recommend just repurposing that salad over the next few days because it will not stand up in the freezer. Sweet potato casserole is a yes for the freezer. I was actually surprised by this one because I thought that the little marshmallows on top would not do very well in the freezer, but apparently even those can be frozen. Just put the whole thing in the freezer, or you can cut it up into individual servings so that way you're just taking out a small portion to defrost and eat. So sweet potato casserole, whether it be with the mini marshmallows or just like a pecan topping, all of those are perfectly fine in the freezer. Pecan pie and pumpkin pie are also both okay in the freezer, so if you do have any leftover sweet treats, go ahead and pop those into the freezer. I also do that often for my regular sweet treats. If I make a large batch and it's just me and my husband eating them, usually it's too much for us to eat in a few days. Even if it's just something like cookies or brownies, I always pop them in the freezer, and that just helps us not to eat them all right away. And lastly, the veggies from your snack platter. This is a maybe. It really depends on what is on your veggie board. Certain veggies that can be cooked into other dishes are actually perfect for the freezer. Things like carrots, celery, and bell pepper, I would just take those and give them a rough chop, and then they will be ready to add into soups and stews. Things like cucumber, on the other hand, probably are not going to be the best in a soup or a stew, so I would go ahead and just finish those off in the next few days and keep them out of the freezer. A good rule of thumb for the veggies from the snack board: if it is something that can be cooked into another dish in a soup or a stir fry, go ahead and freeze it, but do chop it first in whatever size you're going to be using it in. And then anything that is better fresh, like cucumber, is best to keep out of the freezer. Now, another option besides just throwing everything into the freezer right after Thanksgiving is to actually take your leftovers and transform them into whole new dishes. First up, simmer pots. I absolutely love simmer pots this time of year, and it is perfect for using up all these leftover odds and ends from your Thanksgiving meal. Now, if you don't know what a simmer pot is, essentially it is a DIY room freshener, and it just makes your house smell absolutely amazing. And you can use any combinations that you like here. Some popular ones are to use orange slices. You could throw in leftover cranberries if you have those, perhaps a cinnamon stick or a couple cloves, and you are going to bring this to a boil and then just let it simmer on your stovetop, or you could even do this in the Instant Pot, and it will just make your whole house smell like the holidays. And of course, it is super simple and easy to do. Shepherd's pie is another great one for using up leftover mashed potatoes, because of course, if we can't put those in the freezer, we have got to use them up. Now, I've also seen this even done with sweet potato instead of regular mashed potatoes, but I think you would want a more neutral and or savory tasting sweet potato if you were gonna do that. And then another good way to sneak even more leftovers into this is if you have some roasted veggies or even like some peas and corn on the side. Those would both be great to add into the base or the filling of a shepherd's pie. And then of course, you'll just put those mashed potatoes right on top, and then you have a whole new dish to serve to your family. Dinner rolls are perfect for making into leftover sandwiches. If any of you have seen Friends, you probably know about the iconic Thanksgiving sandwich. Don't forget the moist maker. So from your leftovers, just see whatever would be nice on a sandwich. Maybe you have a little vegan roast or meatloaf. Maybe you want a little gravy on there, a little bit of cranberry sauce. And like I said, you can do this all on a dinner roll and make a sandwich, or you could even do it all in a wrap if you prefer. Soup is always going to be a go-to of mine for using up leftovers because you can really take almost any vegetable and turn it into soup. So this is especially good, like I mentioned, if you have an appetizer appetizer board with some leftover veggies, you can just chop those up, maybe add in some chopped up onion and garlic as well, and you already have a perfect ready to go soup base. Once the soup is made, you could even serve it with a couple dollops of mashed potato in there as well, and that'll just add a nice creaminess to it. Speaking of potatoes, since we can't freeze them, I was definitely looking for a lot of mashed potato specific recipes, and of course I came across potato pancakes. Now let me know in the comments below if you have a favorite potato pancake or potato waffle recipe that uses up mashed potatoes. There are actually so many recipes for potato pancakes and potato waffles, so I'll link some of those down below. Super easy and perfect for using up those leftovers. Now I know squash is also another popular ingredient for both holiday and fall cooking, so if you did end up getting extra squash this year and you're not really sure what to do with it, I actually have a recipe video already made with 6 different ways to use up your squash, including these amazing squash brownies that are, oh my gosh, so good. I've made them twice already this year. So I will link that video right here in case you do want help using up your squash. And if you did enjoy this video or found it helpful at all, don't forget to hit the like button down below. And with that, let's eat plants, and I'll see you guys next time.